Today, we are talking about the importance and value of support because, as we know, we don't want to just install something and disappear. We actually need human beings to help us bring our dreams to life and keep those dreams going. And that's where Kontek steps in. So, Marques, I'll turn it to you first, and then I will turn it to our very special guest, Brandon Patton, a support technician with Kontek. I'm excited to have you on the show. Thank you for joining. So, Marques, up first, talk to me a little bit about the value of support in general. How do you think about support, and why is this such a strong emphasis or value to you when you think about what you guys offer with Kontek?
Yeah, absolutely. Support to us is mission critical for a system, and it's something that should be thought about, around the same time you're doing your. So what ends up happening is, we said we had AV and IT convergence years ago. And so it's no longer, okay, I've got AV over here, I've got IT over here. Many of the skill sets that you see in your top end audiovisual technicians, they're straight out of the IT world, right? There are protocols, there's networking. Everything we're dealing with almost is on a network nowadays. And the inverse of that, though, is not true. So an AV technician has gathered all this IT skill oftentimes. But when you're doing IT training, there's no mention of AV anywhere. I feel confident saying that because some of my background came from the IT space. There was no mention of AV at any point in time, although some of those protocols are overlapping. And so once you implement one of these systems, what happens next? I have something happening. Who do I call? If I'm a user, whether I'm in a school, I'm in a corporate environment, I'm in a hospital, what happens next? Do I just call facilities? Do I call IT? Do I, run in the hall and say, hey, I need help? Like, what is supposed to happen? And then what does the person that shows up, what do they know how to do? Do they understand the system? Do they know how it works? Do they have any idea of how to begin to troubleshoot it? Right? Otherwise, now you're back to, wait, we're spending all this time. The room is still down. The room is offline. Class isn't starting. My meeting can't start. What's going on? So it's one area we're talking about immediate need. But then we're talking about long-term. You want a support team that's going to come in and do what's called preventative maintenance, right? We're going to check your system out, see what's going on. What's the life cycle? Where are you at in the life cycle of these products? Cleaning filters. People think that's not a big deal. We've seen projectors go offline because the filter was clogged. It was a dusty environment. No one thought about it. So really, you want that support team is going to be a partner. They're going to advise you about things that need to be replaced, that are coming up, maybe end of life is what we typically refer to it as, or just things that we're seeing that are beginning to fail at a higher clip, and we may need to deal with, a warranty issue, reach out to a manufacturer. So, and those are all things that, you need really a dedicated person for that, because otherwise, again, you're stealing hours. So when you look at the total cost, long term, when you're stealing these hours from employees, how much time is being wasted by teams that really aren't meant to handle this kind of a problem. So that's why I say, to anyone out there, if you're dealing with AV systems, especially when you get to larger scales, you absolutely should have some kind of support partner that's going to be dedicated to you and be able to help you in your time of need.
Yeah, that sounds right. We've got another episode on total cost of ownership where we talk about like having your, for example, your clients, having their IT person having to juggle all these things, having somebody run around to all the different rooms, make sure everything's set up. Well, that starts to get really expensive over time. So having good dedicated support can alleviate that total cost of ownership. But I like how you were talking about it is a very broad set of knowledge. And it also is a long-term set of knowledge. Wisdom and experience have been doing this for so many years. It's like, hey, I should check the filter on that projector because I've seen this fail a bunch of times. So that checks out. And of course, everybody's always having the experience of like, I've got to call, for example, for a trip, I've got to call a major airline to talk about our seating arrangements. And I know I'm going to dedicate 2 hours of my afternoon to go through that. And it would be rerouted to like 3 different departments. Or you have what my wife just experienced with our doctor's office where they want you to fill out something online and then you get to a certain point and then it says, oh, you should call this number to do it in person. So you call that person and then they say, oh, no, you got to fill it out online. And it's like, no, but they just told me to call you. And then you get this runaround. Yep. So it's like you want a good experience, but you also need to be talking to people who know what they're doing and can resolve your issue very quickly, which is where our dear friend Brandon Patton joins us on this call. Brandon, talk to me about, you had mentioned something before we started recording about coming behind other integrators that may not have this kind of support capability that you have. And so you see this experience with people that do get the installation, but then need the support on the back end, and it may not be there. And so you guys have a good process of how you go about doing your support, even when it's other folks' installations or designs. So talk to me a little bit about that, and then we'll talk about the process of support on your end.
Absolutely. I mean, you hit the nail on the head. That it's essentially, there are a lot of times that we come behind another integrator that maybe, they have really good equipment that they would respect for that space, and, is absolutely has good bones and good, capabilities, but may not necessarily be functioning optimally based off of either previous configuration or what have you. And so the end user obviously could be frustrated and trying to reach out to that integrator. And there have been a lot of times where those integrators either A, don't have the support team available in that area. And so we've seen where they may end up having to fly in a support team member from a different state for some reason to try to resolve an issue. And sometimes that just, the communication between that, obviously that's very, very slow to be able to do support remotely, or not say remotely, but from a completely different region for somewhere here locally. And so we've seen issues where, sometimes the support departments, they do exist, but they may not necessarily have the skill set or the knowledge base required to do that well. And I think that's one of the biggest things where our company can shine is we actually have a combined knowledge just in our department alone is almost 100 years worth of experience. So it's a, having that much repertoire, like in your back pocket, to be able to walk into a space you've never seen before, because to be able to support like a system that we've designed and we have installed and integrated, obviously we already have all the bells and whistles and the tricks kind of understood because we designed it. But when we come in behind another integrator that we have no information, a lot of times we don't get line drawings, a lot of times we don't get configuration files. So we have to be able to walk into a space blind and understand what the client's needs are, and then understand how to resolve the issues that they're having. And that's kind of, we're seeing unfortunately, a very commonality across multiple installations, across multiple integrators that we tend to come behind is either something's not fully configured or it's just not functional the way the client had thought it could be, which a lot of times ends up being capable of doing that. It just needs to be configured to do so. So there are all kinds of ways that we support, our clients from former integrators that, may come in, they'll install a space, and then they completely disappear. They may try to reach out and contact the integrator. The client may try to contact the integrator. However, for some reason, they either don't reply or they're slow to respond. Ends up leaving a bad taste in your mouth. So that's kind of where we come in.
Yeah, it makes sense because there's so many variables. Marques and I have talked quite a lot about just the technical details that you have to get right, which leads to his emphasis of, hey, bring us in as early as possible because you got to get the architecture, the sounds, the mics. We talked a lot about all the different math that's involved. And so being able to get all that right, especially when you're just walking in blind on a new support request, if you will, that's got to be really challenging. So what is the process of when you come into a new space or you're working with a client from the initial dream all the way now to the implementation and support? What does that process look like for you? In other words, what does good support look like from your perspective?
Absolutely. Obviously, one of the best ways is early on. So when the integration is fully complete and turned on, it's already having, quality equipment, already having quality configuration and integration to the space. And good support means you don't have to know us on a first name basis because you shouldn't have to see us consistently. Obviously there are always it's technology in some fashion, it's going to fail. So the best support, honestly, is up front before it ever gets to our department, by the rest of our teams that are of extremely high quality. But in the event that it does have to come to us, we are a fairly well-versed group of team members that are fairly dynamic and capable of arriving on site and identifying, issues fairly expeditiously, and then also understanding what needs to be done to resolve that. So again, as I mentioned earlier, just due to the significant amount of experience that is in our department, that a lot of speed and reliability comes back to that. For example, we have clients that we even support remotely, which is a getting to be a larger and larger portion of our business, because being able for us to see an issue happen before the client's ever aware that it's an issue, we can contact that client and say, we just noticed this thing happened. We can resolve this. However, sometimes it may require for us to show up on site, for example, which has happened. I mean, we have a ton of remote capabilities where some things we can actually resolve remotely. But in the event where we notice an issue that pops up, and to be able to reach out to the client and say, hey, by the way, this thing is broke and is not going to work. And the client's like, I didn't even realize that. How did you, and it's like a whole lot of, well, we can fix that right now. Do you have some availability that we can send someone over and actually get this, back up and running? And they're like, man, we've got a meeting in here this afternoon. That's perfect. If you could do that, And so we've run into those instances where providing good support is being proactive as opposed to reactive. When we can, for example, you mentioned earlier about cleaning filters and projectors. That's a legitimate thing that we have come across where, because somebody's not, actually keeping and maintaining their equipment, it goes into a thermal shutdown, and they're like, I don't know why my projector keeps cutting off. Well, it's because, the internal temperature is just skyrocketed because it can't breathe. Simple things like cleaning a projector filter, on a very consistent basis makes a massive difference in the long-term performance of the equipment, as well as the performance, the experience in the room.
I'll just add one thing really quick. As far as, good support in this vein, I don't like tooting our own horn, but I'm going to briefly, really great support. This is any organization. There's a human element to this, right? And I think that's one thing that every team should know and every client should expect it. When we're getting called in on a support call, someone is under stress. Something is not working. It's usually last minute, because it's going to be fine. My meeting is tomorrow. You show up that day, you connect. It's not fine. All of a sudden, it's not fine. You're human. Your stress levels are going to start to rocket, especially if you have a CEO meeting, you have a president's meeting, something is happening. There's a lot of high power individuals, coming to use that space, completely natural. So one of the things, from a support standpoint is, yes, I have to have, a high level of knowledge and skill and a wide breadth of ability to deal with all these spaces. Most importantly, when I encounter, my client, can I make sure they're calm? Can I calm them down? Because you'll go in and, someone is again, a heightened sense of urgency. They may not know they're yelling and they're kind of yelling. Can you keep your cool? Can you be level headed? Can you help them to relax and reassure them that, hey, no matter what, don't worry. We've got you. We're going to take care of it. And one of the things I'm always impressed by is the reception, within our team, and I'm sure in other teams as well, that, it's like a long-term friend or family member. We have some clients that when you show up, our team, they're being hugged, like, oh, it's so good to see you again. And, to me, that's great. That's the overall experience, right? Because we want it from start to finish. When we say we're going to be there for you, we're going to take care of it. That's not meant to be lip service. It's not meant to be marketing or in a sales brochure. We really do want to be a partner. And that partner goes from the very beginning of our process with our account managers all the way through our support team coming in, help and maintain your space, help and calm things down. If everything's, it feels like everything's on fire, like, no, it's not usually. Maybe every once in a while in extreme cases. But I think that's a really important part for any support partner is, are you calm? Are you cool, level-headed under pressure? And do you always remember it's not just the technology, you're dealing with people?
I think that's such an important emphasis, great word, because like Brandon was talking about, the proactivity is so important. Because I can imagine if I'm head of multiple different things at an organization, like some of the clients that you guys work with, I don't have time to be thinking about the filters and replacing those on my projectors. That is not anything that is ever going to cross my mind. So having the proactivity that you guys do, that you can think about these things ahead of time on behalf of the client, huge value. But then also, to your point, Marques, it brings down that stress level so that if I do have that big meeting there's actually things that have been happening along the way so that that meeting's coming up and it's actually going to go off without a hitch. And I don't have to have this call where I was just having this call with somebody yesterday where it's like a billing issue for a hospital. And he was like, I hope you never have to talk to me again. And I was like, I hope I never have to talk to you again either. But we both laughed and enjoyed each other's company. But it's that kind of thing. Like, I don't want to talk to support right now. I've got this meeting I'm preparing for. So I can imagine both of those things are actually super, super helpful. The proactivity, lowering that stress, and like, hey, we're all in this together. We're going to have a great time. This is important. We're going to get you taken care of. And that just makes it feel like we're a partner and we're doing this together and we're building our businesses together. And I think it's such a beautiful thing. So Brandon, talk to me a little bit about, there's some specific things that I think you guys work through with your, call it support relationship. You mentioned the remote monitoring, proactive maintenance, and things like that. But talk to me about like, there's training. So if you guys are working with a client, there is a training involved, and that you guys have a really, you know, if I can say, like kind of long-term orientation to the relationship that you have with folks. Why is that important when you're thinking about support?
So all of our support agreement contract holders, they actually have unlimited training available to them. And the reason that's fairly important, honestly, is because just like most businesses, people come and they may stay in a workforce area for, 10, 15 years, but maybe 30 years, and if they end up retiring, all of that knowledge base goes away with them for how that space may be operating. If you have a new hire come in and they have no clue how that space should operate, the cool thing about having a support agreement contract is you have unlimited amount of training. And so you can ask for us to come in on site, demonstrate how the space functions, how to control it, how to turn things on and off, and change sources and adjust mic levels and all those things. You can bring in your groups or teams of people maybe that might be using the space on a consistent basis. Like I'll give you for instance at universities where they have different professors that come in and use the space. They may be unfamiliar, for example, with a new integration, and we can come in and actually demonstrate how those spaces function. How kind of essentially just putting them at ease and giving them familiarity of the new space effectively, or even of a space that is just technically new to them. It may be 3, 4, 5 years old, but they're new to the area and maybe have just gotten hired. So it might be, it definitely is worth taking some time to be familiar with the spaces that they're going to be, using. And so we tend to, work with our clients to be able to give them that comfort so that when they come into the space to teach a class, they're not concerned with how they're going to control all the equipment. That should be one of the last things in the back of their mind. And it honestly should just be muscle memory. One of the things that we wholeheartedly believe is that, technology should be a help, not a hindrance for the spaces, for the people that come in to use those different types of equipment. So having good training obviously will set the foundation for that help kind of mentality. So when they come into a space, it should emphasize whatever it is they're teaching, or they could be recording, depending on the space or the application. If it's a conference call or for a conference room, they can come and connect into the space, for example, and have a successful conference call with any number of people without having to worry about, is this thing functioning? Am I going to be able to be heard with this microphone? Is the camera going to be able to see me? Is it going to be, will we have everybody in the shot? That kind of thing. So it's that's a massive part. And honestly, again, the cool thing for the folks that have a support agreement contract is they can reach out to us at any time and say, hey, can we schedule some time to do training? In fact, I was actually doing that 2 days ago. One of our clients with a few of the new professors that they had just hired, and they were like, these, they're new to the space. They'd like to be familiarized with it. And we spent, 30, 45 minutes walking through the different spaces and, really gave them a lot of confidence so that they could walk in and be able to use the system without any issues.
It's the new SaaS, just service as a service. It sounds really lovely. Marques, I'm curious, something we talked about before is how you guys think about the evolution of different technologies that you've installed. Like we mentioned kind of I guess, paradigm to be thinking about as sort of like an iPhone upgrade. Like every 2 years, you got to upgrade that iPhone because that stuff's degrading. You can get on this plan. So Brandon, both of you and Marques, how do you guys think about when you're installing that technology and knowing that you need to upgrade it over time, or at least be thinking about that, what that depreciation might be, or how you guys go about monitoring and evaluating that, making recommendations to your clients? Because I know that's got to be an important thing to be thinking about. Like, to be this partnership with this long-term orientation, you're going to need to reinstall these things in 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, depending on the life of the machine. So what does that look like, and how do you guys approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. That is a point of, constant communication and really just education on things, right? It's something that you see it a lot of times being taken for granted. If you're issued a computer by your workforce or your workplace, typically you'll have it 3 to 5 years maybe, then it's recycled out. Almost every enterprise I know of operates on, a 3 to 5 year refresh cycle. In part because, yes, that's the optimal life of the machine, but also you don't want to lose productivity because now you're fighting issues that are pretty common that occur, throughout that life cycle. Audiovisual components are purpose-built computers in most cases, right? It's a computer that controls this microphone that makes sure that audio goes out over the internet so you can hear me correctly. And so we think about it in that same vein of, okay, we're typically going to target around, 5 years, and it's different across, components. Speakers may last for 15, who knows? But what happens with a support team is I can say, okay, here's the overall bill. So we do know you're probably going to want to refresh in, say, 5 to 7 years. So the technology and the capabilities of cameras, right? They've changed so much. Now, I won't say AI all the time. Some of it is just algorithms of things that were already there. But, that's a whole nother topic of conversation. But in terms of tracking capabilities and framing and all these things, right? If you roll the clock back 10 years ago, a lot of cameras didn't really have that, or it's just coming out, or it's pretty choppy, so you weren't enabling it. Nowadays, it's fairly common for us to activate auto tracking. So a professor may stand up in the front of a room, a camera locks on, he can walk back and forth. He or she can walk back and forth. They're always in the picture. Same thing with auto framing. I don't know that we've seen a camera that doesn't have auto framing now. So once a speaker begins, at a large conference table, the camera is automatically doing the work to reframe that shot, pick that person up, right? So that's not something that, we always advise. We're not going to tell you to do an upgrade because there's a new feature set, but we will tell you, hey, it's time to upgrade because this hardware is getting to the end of life. So now the manufacturer is not supporting it. We're going to start to see enhanced failures. If you have a camera that runs all day long, every day for years, it's just what happens. There are mechanical pieces in there, they wear out. And so what we do is, as we're doing preventative maintenance and things like that, we just keep you abreast of what's happening. Say, hey, this camera is at, year 3, or this control processor is at year 5. We might want to think about, upgrading this. And typically what we really see and what drives some of this as well is the use case of the room changes, right? As we go further along, this conference room used to all meet in here and just give a presentation. Okay, well, fast forward. No, we have to be able to do web conferencing now. So now that capability has changed. Will those components, be serviceable and reusable in a new overall environment? Maybe. That's something we'll look at and evaluate. But it's just one of those things where there's the evolution of the technology, then there's also the evolution of the use case, and then you're also managing and monitoring just overall life cycle of that equipment. Because again, you don't want, your room going down because you have a 10-year-old piece of equipment that everyone knew was 10 years old, and everyone knew it was time to, cycle that thing out. And we warn you, like, hey, this is going to happen. It's been, going for so long, it'll start to drop out, or it'll start to fail. Is that what you want in your environment? Some people, they can live with that. In most cases, it's a no. Like, once it starts having those failures, because again, now you're losing that trust in the space, trust in the technology, that comfort of knowing it's going to work. And you get the whole, episode where you have multiple rooms. Oh, we don't want to use that room because it never works. Let's go to this other room, or I'll just work at my desk, things like that. So that's how we try to manage, the entire life cycle and keep people pulled into the conversation, updated on, where their components are, where the room is overall. And if there really is something that's launched or something that's come out, and from how we see them using the space, it can enhance their experience, then we start talking about, there's new capabilities as well, and we bring that into the discussion.
That's a ton to keep track of. But, like I said earlier, hey, if I'm, the leader of this space, I don't have any bandwidth for thinking through all that kind of stuff. Like, if a manufacturing, deprecates a feature or a machine, or, just there's so much to be thinking about. The trends in AV, what's changing, how AI is going to be incorporated into it or not, or whatever. It's just a ton to keep up with.
Yeah, I will say, long term speaking, especially if you just got into a space with a completely brand new integration, you basically have a decent baseline to know this is effectively the amount of money that was spent on this space in 5 to 7 years. You should expect to spend around that same ballpark. If the needs don't drastically change in the space, you can start budgeting for that now. And so knowing what kind of like target value you should be hitting towards in 5 to 7 years from now, that's one of the things that we tend to do is kind of give a thermometer for our clients to know, okay, well, this space is 5 years old, this one's 7 years old, this one's getting close to 10. You definitely this needs to be the highest priority in getting this space refreshed. This guy that's only 5 years old, you've got a little bit more life left in that area, so it may not necessarily be time to update or to upgrade in that space right now, especially when you got this 10-year-old room that is, potentially fail fairly quickly. Again, as Marques mentioned, equipment going end of life, where a manufacturer may not necessarily support a specific piece of equipment any longer. They no longer manufacture parts for it, for example. Those kinds of gauges that we can provide to help our clients know where their entire facility, if they have a multi-building, campus, for example, they have a really good understanding where certain phases need to happen along the way so that they can budget appropriately for those projects to come out. And then that way, when it comes time to actually upgrade those projects, they have the resources and assets. It's not a surprise anymore. Now they've got this. We've been planning to do this over a certain amount of time, and they actually have the necessary resources to apply to that space to have it done well so that it can last another 10 years, or 7 years or what have you. Again, assuming the use cases don't drastically change as we've seen happen in a few places. So, that's a huge portion of it, especially from a finance perspective, is being able to plan properly. And that's one of the things of having a support agreement contract that we are constantly doing preventative maintenance on the different spaces that are covered. And so we can gauge and understand and know and provide recommendations on the spaces that should be considered for an update, in a certain amount of time. So we, that's a fairly regular thing that we do, and that I think, a lot of our clients have taken advantage of, because now we start to see this kind of repetitive, like, okay, so now we're attacking, these hot spots that have been up and running for so long, and that, those spaces are getting refreshed. And so you kind of are in this ever-living cycle. It's not typically like, for some reason, I think a lot of people they kind of get to this point where they're like, I just spent all this money, I'm good, I shouldn't have to spend any more money. And the thing is like, for now, that's absolutely true. If this thing that has been put in meets the expectations and checks all the boxes of what needs to be done for that space and has accomplished all those things, that's absolutely 100% correct, because all this stuff is brand new. However, there needs to be an understanding that later down the road, eventually, again, like we mentioned, due to the technology differences and how fast everything changes, it needs to be a consideration long term, to be able to budget appropriately, to be able to, be able to store those resources up when it comes time to, refreshing those spaces. And like putting a brand new roof on the building. If you just put a brand new roof on the building, in 20 years from now, you're going to have to put another roof on. If you create a sinking fund effectively, that you can put those 20 years worth of putting that money back, and then 20 years from now, you can put a new roof on the building again. That makes it eases a burden long term that somebody's not going to have to deal with when it comes time to refreshing those spaces.
That's right. Our finance-oriented listeners will deeply understand that. They have a line in their model where they got to build that savings in. So what you guys could do, it sounds like, is, when you commission a new space, you crash that champagne bottle on the bow, you should also drop off a little piggy bank. Like, hey, start saving, because this is technology. You're going to need to do this again.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, well, anything else that is going to be useful for our listeners, especially the operations-minded folks who kind of understand how all these, little details kind of work together and need to maintain that space over the long term? Anything else that's been useful or thoughtful that you guys, kind of incorporate into your process?
start with a solid build. Start at the very beginning with a great build, a great rollout, and a great process. Because if any of that goes off the rails in the beginning, you're going to find yourself replacing something sooner than later. I mean, we have, it sounds like we're being hyperbolic. We've actually lived this and seen this where, decisions were made to, try to save money and cut costs. And we have clients that had to replace components that we typically see last 5 years easily. They made a decision. It resulted in having to replace all those components in about 18 months. And it was pretty wild. And it's like, hey, you think you're going to save a few bucks up front, but really, again, if you start having premature failures, things went offline, those choices you make in the beginning, they either have consequences or benefits. It's up to you either way based on the choice you've made. But that will lead to support calls. Either they're calls because something went offline or failed early, or we're just doing preventative maintenance and we're like, hey, this is great. It's going to definitely last you, 5-7 years, what have you. Or it's something we go in, we try to hide our facial expressions. We don't want to frown right away, but we say, hey, we're going to need to keep an eye on this. We've seen a few things. It may not last as long as you would hope, but we'll keep you advised. So I'd say early in the process, make quality decisions.
That's something we've talked about before. Do it right the first time.
Do it right the first time.
It's going to cost you, but in the long term, total cost of ownership, again, it'll be cheaper. It'll be easier on your brain. Just do it right the first time. All right. Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for teaching us about the value of support, especially when it comes to the AV installation, design, implementation, integration process. There's a lot of moving parts, and you guys are always on top of it. So very glad to hear more of the details. If you'd like more resources like this, please go to kontek.com, Kontek.com, and the team has tons of stuff there to review. And we will see you next time. Brandon, thanks for joining.
My pleasure.
See you on the next episode.
Yep. Thanks for having me.